Greetings, I'm in the shed and I got a bit of a project to do. I'm going to make a knife, but I've already got the blade. So this is a woodblow profile in 52-100 high carbon bearing steel, and it's got Scandi grind, 0 Scandi grind. I don't like micro bevels, never have, probably never will. It's 3.5mm thick, and that's a pretty good thickness for a bushcraft knife in my opinion. Most of mine come in at that thickness. So as for handle, what I have got here, I've got some bird's eye maple which I have epoxied on black liners. Here's one. That's just paper as a barrier, which unfortunately is stuck on. That's why I put the paper on, to stop it sticking to the wooden plank. There we go. I mark the backs. They've both been stuck on in the same position, so I'll get that book match just right. Well, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to put that on the belt sander, take all the excess off, and then I'll get back to you. Next thing, mask up the blade. Now I don't take this tape too far down because I know I'm going to stop my scale just about there. So I need a little bit of a gap, and you'll see why later. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take one side and I'll say I've marked that, that's the back. So I want that to go on there. I got a copper colour marker which stands out pretty well against the black. I'm going to mark this out now. Now not everybody does this the same way, but what I do now, I get some double-sided tape and I stick the handle on to the scales. I say, a lot of guys, I know for a fact, they'll clamp it together, but this is the way I do it. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to put 2 loveless bolts in it and one 8mm brass tube. So I'm going to drill an 8.1mm hole in there, and that one get a 4mm hole. 4mm because that's the diameter of the bolt. To the drill press we go. Now I'm going to drill them through. being very careful to hold it tight. Now you can't put a clamp on it at this point, but I'm pretty careful, so I'm not going to bother. Right then, that's all the holes drilled, and luckily this one's an easy one, 3 holes, piece of cake. When I do a bush tool, they've got 5, so this is a bit easier. What I'm looking for now, I'm going to look at the one I've already marked, and I'm going to take that side off. Obviously get rid of the tape. Now I'm left with that side, and this is what I do now. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to draw a line over here. And what that's giving me is the curve from there to there. Now before I put that on the bandsaw and take all that meat off, I need to drill the step drill for the Loveless bolt. I've got one of these. Now this is an 8mm step down to a 4mm, and I believe these came from the dreaded China, but the 4mm bit was out there. Well, what I did, I cut it off and left that much, which is probably the thickness of the blade. Well, it's about 3.5mm. So I will drill that through there on a hard surface so it stops. Depending where I buy the Loveless bolts from, sometimes they're a little thick, and I've got to re-drill these again with an 8.1mm drill bit, but luckily these ones are okay. Now I'm going to cut the section of brass tube down. And you will be surprised how hot that gets. One thing I like to do at this stage with my tube, I like to fill it full of something. Only one end. I'll either use tissue paper or a piece of paper, whatever's at hand. Cut that off, because when I put it through the hole and there's epoxy in there, I don't want that tube filling up with epoxy. Next thing, I'm going to take that onto the bandsaw now, and I'm going to, both slabs, I'm going to cut them. I'm not going to cut them tight, I'm going to cut them a bit full, say 2mm full. The one I marked, I've cut it along there, but what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to round it off on the disc sander, and then I'm going to put the blade onto it and sight it to see if I'm happy with where the curve is. Not quite happy with that. I need to take a bit more off. That should do it. Now it's attached, I can match them two up. See how it's burnt? Burns really easy. Got to go slow with it. So I'm going to match them two up, then I'm going to round them off and go through all the grits. Right, so they're pretty even. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to use the knife maker's grinder to round these off and go through the grits. Now this is something you could have done on the other belt sander and then hand sanded them nice and round. But to save time, I'm going to use this. That's gone down to 1000 grit. Well, I won 600. I'll count it as 1000. Last thing I'm going to do to that is put it on the polishing wheel with a loose mop. Done. Next thing I'm going to do, obviously I'm going to take it loose. I'm going to sand it more or less down to the line inside on both sides, and then I'm going to put it together. And one thing I need to do before I stick it together, I need to clean the edges of the tang off with some acetone. You can use a nail varnish remover, which works fine. Tend to use quite a bit of it because it's not that strong. I'm putting a fresh disc on. That one was burning. So that's both of them almost shaped. There's about a 1/2 mil left right around the edge. So the last thing I'm going to do to these now, I'm going to put them flat on my belt sander just to take all the burrs off. I don't press very hard, just enough to take the burrs off. And what you've got to watch is that one, because that sits on the tang. You really don't want a burr there. So what I'll do, I'll take some wire wool and just take the burr off carefully. While I was cleaning the blade up, the tang with acetone, I realised there's a bit of a burr all the way around. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lay it flat on my knife maker's grinder and just take the burr off, and I'll be roughening it up a little bit so it'll hold better anyway. Just got to make sure I don't come too far this way. I'll just put the bolts through now, just to make sure I haven't messed up, which I haven't. And now I'm going to epoxy it together. And this is slow set, so it'll have to wait all night to go off, and I'll be back on it tomorrow. Gotta watch you don't get any little bits in there. Better to have too much than too little. Yeah, plenty on there. Don't put it too tight. Now, one thing I like to do, the pieces of tape which came off, I get rid of the epoxy. Simple reasoning, because you're only going to have to grind it away afterwards anyway. Now, if I'd have been using fast set at this point, it would have started going off. Sometimes I do use a quick set, but because I know I'm filming this, I'll use slow. I'll take a little bit more time. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to take my acetone and I'm going to use a cotton bud just to clean that piece up. Don't want it too wet. Well, that's the handle on. Next thing, I'm going to leave it overnight to dry, and I'm going to leave it in the vise. So I will be back tomorrow, which for me will be quite a few hours, and for you will be a matter of seconds. Following day, epoxy's gone off, and the next thing I'm going to do is saw the bolts off. Now I could use an angle grinder with a thin blade to cut them off. The only problem with that is it gets hot and it melts the epoxy. So unless I got a lot of them to cut off, I'll just use a saw. That's the scales flat. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take the profile tight to the steel. I'm going to do that on the belt sander, and I'm also going to use a rotary tool, Dremel, in that tight little curve. Now I'm going to give the handle some shape. So disc sander I'm going to use first, and I'm going to just flatten off the scales. Take perhaps a mil or two off each side. Then I'm going to go down that way to take a bit of material off there and there. Then I'm going to do that to get an oval shape on it, and then I'll be going on the belt. Now the handle has shape. what I'm going to do next, I'm going to get the Dremel out again, and any ridges I'm going to smooth them off. Now that feels good. Well, it feels good to me anyway. Hope it feels good to the customer. Well, that shape. Now what I could do next is go through all the grits. And I'll be starting at a 120 and I'll be finishing off at a 600 and then polishing it. Now, I can do this by hand, but I'm not going to do it by hand. I use drum sanders on the pillar drill. So now we've got basically the finished shape. I'm pleased with that. And that's 120 grit. Obviously the grit wears down a bit the more I do, so it's probably a bit less than 120 grit now. It's probably more like about a 180. So I'm pleased with that. Now I'm going to repeat the process with 3 more grits. One thing I like to do, especially with quite a thick tube on the lanyard hole, I like to use the reamer, put it in the pillar drill and just take it down a bit, so there's not too much of a sharp edge. It's a nice transition. Well, that's gone down now. That's nice. 2 more grits to go and it's done. But before I do them 2, I'm going to ream that hole out. One more thing. I usually make my knives in batches of 2 or 3, but I didn't today because I'm making this one and I'm filming it. But what I have done is I've taken a bit off my my camp knife, which I may have mentioned in an earlier video I was going to do. So I thought, well, I've got everything out now and I'm geared up, that I'd take a bit off that. I'm taking quite a bit off and it's feeling good. On with the build. Done. Now, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to give it a good rub with some wire wool, just in case there's any grit or anything left in the pores. There isn't, but I'm doing it anyway. I take some oil, and at the moment I'm using teak oil, and I'm going to put some on a rag, put it on the handle. Don't put the knife down on a dirty surface. You don't want to put any dirt now on this handle while you're putting oil on it. Now this teak oil is pretty thin, but what I'm going to do, every area that there's wood visible, I'm covering it. I'm going to hang it up here in the window overnight, and then tomorrow morning I'll give it another coat. I'll probably give it about 5 wet, leave it dry, wet, leave it dry, 5 coats, and then I'll put a sealing coat on, which should basically be wax. Tomorrow I'm going to get on with making the sheath. I'm not going to film that, basically because I've already done a video making exactly the same kind of sheath. Well, not quite exactly, but similar sheath to this one. Well, knife is done. Got to have that nice click when you're wet forming. Got to have it. Well, I'm pleased with that, and I hope a customer will be pleased with it. It's turned out nice. It's quite a light knife for the size, which is nice. There we are. Thank you very much for watching. And one little thing, if you've stayed to the end, you've obviously enjoyed it. Any new viewers of mine, if you'd like to go back and watch some of my earlier videos, the first few were a bit crap, to be fair. They're not very good at all, because I didn't have a clue how to edit it. But there's some decent stuff on there, and it would really help me if you went back to watch them, because of something to do with the YouTube algorithm. If people watch your early stuff, it promotes your new stuff, something along them lines. So, or if somebody's a regular viewer and fancies going back, I would be very grateful. Thank you. So, thank you very much for watching, and please be safe. That's the main thing. Ta-ra.